Hey,
Hi.
how are you this fine sunny day?
Terrific. A great topic today. I'm very excited.
Awesome. Do you want to introduce the topic?
Sure. So, this podcast is about Indigenous people, and I have taken kind of an interesting take on it. I'm going to apologize in advance for bludgeoning the pronunciation. Manoomin, it's a wild rice up in the Minnesota. Well, it's all over the that area, I guess, but it's a nice, interesting, relevant story from the Chippewa Nation, kind of environmental, it's nutrition, but it's more about like the cosmological, legal aspect to it. So I have a couple nice little stories. So that's what my topic is today. What is yours?
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing about the Chippewa and the manoomin.
Thank you.
And I obviously, if you missaid it, I've missaid it as well. But I focused a little bit more looking at my own background, but looking at the studies that have been done. I'm from Puerto Rico, and I have done a DNA study on myself and know that I do have, besides the family lore, know that I do have within my genetic makeup markers for Taíno Indians. And actually, my mitochondrial DNA comes from a Taíno woman. So, I took a look at sort of like, well, what's the research that's been done around the Taínos kind of recently? Because there's been a lot over time. And that's a little bit more what I'm likely to talk about, like what their origins were. And I'll talk a little bit about updated genome study because when I first did mine, the University of Puerto Rico actually had, I was brand new to Facebook, but they were on Facebook being a university. And one of the professors who was involved in the study done in the early 2000s had been on there sharing information about what companies to do your test with
Mm,
and to please indicate if you were part of the broader diaspora that you were willing to have your information used as part of that study. Because
mm.
the company that she recommended required you as an individual to allow, even if your direct name and stuff was removed, you still had to okay the use of it, unlike other companies that were doing
I
genetic
see.
study. So it was the reason she recommended family tree DNA at the time, because their rules and regulations and everything required you, even for studies
Or
that,
collecting the data.
yeah.
That's
So
quite cool.
even if your personal identifying information was being stripped, you still had to say your genetic information could be included. And she said that that was the best system. So,
It's interesting.
but there's been studies done since then. Just I looked up a little bit about it and we'll talk a little bit more. But I want to hear about the Chippewa and the,
Oh, yes. So this was interesting, and it's a little bit tied into my current archaeology course that I'm taking.
what is that course, Katie? Tell us a little bit about your course.
It's called World Archaeology. And we have 3 terms. So we finished the Viking term, and now we're in the middle of the Americas term. And the next term will be Africa. So at the moment, we're near the end of the Americas, but it's quite focused on the Andean region because the 2 professors tag team teaching it that's their specialty. But my first assignment, and this is why it's relevant to this topic, we picked an object. So I picked this ceramic head vessel that was found in a burial site. And we were supposed to interpret it. So I used it's called Andean animist perspectivism. I took this theoretical framework and applied it. I don't have my grade yet, so I don't know how I did it, but I have to say it was super interesting. And I'm interested in animism because Japanese have Shintoism, and that is an animist religion. I got this newsletter in my mailbox yesterday from an organization called JSTOR. They have lots of different stories. And it was a legal action that was taken by the Chippewa tribe. And the plaintiff was their wild rice. Yes, the manoomin. And so what was happening was this Canadian oil company has a pipelines going through their land, Minnesota kind of area. And they received a permit in 2021 from Minnesota's Natural Resources Department to enlarge a pipeline. And they would need what billions of gallons of water, which would affect where this wild grass grows. So the tribe brought them to court to stop it. And the plaintiff is the actual plant, the wild grass. And they got kicked out. But it's a part of this movement, this rights of nature movement. So it's not, it was unusual because it was a plant. But there have been cases of trees being plaintiffs around the world. It's mostly, I guess, rivers and water systems that are plaintiffs. The plant thing is not that usual, and they don't win. But it's, I guess, setting a precedent for it. So maybe one day. So then I got interested in this wild rice situation.
Just before you just before you switch on to the wild rice, I
Hmm.
just wanted to note about the animism and the a throughput that I see in a lot of native cultures, which is a protection of the land and the natural resources. I think there've been a number of cases. I think about BlackRock and the water protectors who were trying to keep the pipeline from going through. I also, sorry guys, Mercury is currently retrograde. My brain is not firing as quickly as it usually does. But it's the cross wires is what's happening in my head right now, because I was also thinking about the fact that in Puerto Rico, they talk a lot about, like, the connection to the ancestors and stuff, but there is, like, a whole sense of a feeling of the land, of belonging to it, more so than it belonging to you. And it's a feeling that I'm talking about. I don't know how quite to express it, but just when you were mentioning those things, they were things that sparked for me a connection across the board for Native peoples. So you were going to get towards the wild grass, grain, rice.
Yeah, the rice, which is actually grass. But so I guess I should I'll take a step back and explain animism. Just very quickly, the whole concept of animism is that there is a spirit or something in objects. So everything has a living element to it, a stone, a mountain, grass, trees. And so that is very Shinto in Japan. And that is also very, I know the Andean cultures have had that. And also Native Americans also have this element to it. So the reason that they placed Manoomin as the plaintiff is because it's not just a food for them. It's an it's a relative, it's a part of their family, and it's that same animist concept of we're all interconnected, objects, people, and we are all interacting together constantly. And this wild rice is a relative or a spirit. And so when they go ricing, so when they, because I guess it grows in like a swampy landscape, and it's quite arduous to gather and to harvest it. But when they do, they express gratitude. So there's offerings, tobaccos and prayers and stuff like that. And it's linked to their cosmological myth. So they believe that humans were the last to arrive on Earth after rock, water, fire, wind, plants, and animals. So we're the most vulnerable and we know the least. So um, we need to be thankful for everything that we could get, basically. So it's such an interesting idea to put this grass rice as a plaintiff in a legal framework And actually, the reason is because in 2018, the tribe recognized the rights of this wild rice, the manoomin. So it's the first law to recognize the legal rights of a plant species. And I think that was the basis upon which they set this it's a plaintiff. It can become a plaintiff. So it's didn't go anywhere, but you know, they're trying. And then I thought, well, what's the, nutritional value of I was just curious. It's a very good source of dietary fiber.
We
Um,
need more fiber.
nearly double the amount of protein that you would get from white rice. Um, and its antioxidant activity is 10 to 15 times higher than white rice. Very interesting. Now, before I finish, I have a couple things. So I was also curious what are some other tribes and kind of a similar thing. So I found the Iroquois, and they're called Haudenosaunee. Sorry, but they have this myth called the Three Sisters. Have you heard of it? It's the
Mhm.
corn, the bean, and the squash. Symbolizes harmony and balance. But more practically, they grow them together, and it's for an actual scientific reason because the corn provides the structure for the beans to climb. The beans fix the nitrogen in the soil, and the squash provides natural mulch and weed control. So it's symbiotic, and it's a part of their cosmology and their myth. The three sisters, they're the three goddesses.
It's also part of what a lot of the native peoples in the Northeast did, and it was part of what those native folks who actually helped the invaders, the pilgrims,
Yes, yes, yeah.
it's part of what they taught them to plant in order to be able to eat.
I mean, it's brilliant, isn't it? And then you don't need fertilizers or pesticides because you've got these three working in symbiosis. It's very interesting. And then my last story, which I read this whole thing online. I have all the sources, so I will provide it. So this is for the Blackfeet Nation. I think they're Lakotas. And it's the wild prairie turnip, also called the Timpsilla. Sorry, bludgeoning. And it's nutritionally similar to a potato. And it was actually called by Lewis and Clark as a white apple. I don't think it tastes like an apple. I don't know why they said that.
White men, white menning.
So this is associated with a myth, like a really nice story. And I'm going to tell it and then I'll be finished. Um, so one summer day, there was a lovely girl and her name was Feather Woman. And so she's sleeping in the prairie and she wakes up and she sees this beautiful man, youth, youth. And she said, she knows he's Morning Star, one of the sky gods. And she runs to her camp to tell her sister, I'm going to marry this guy. I saw him. Her sister's like, whatever. And all the camp people are like, you're crazy. Never, ever. So Feather Woman was walking along this river path, and she runs into Morning Star. And he's like, hello, I'm going to take you home to meet the parents. So up they fly and they go to Skyland, and he takes her to his mom and dad's house, Sun and Moon. And Sun was out scorching the earth somewhere. So Moon, mom, she made her a dress and welcomed her in. And then the Sun came home and they all said, great, you're married. So that's wonderful. Everyone's happy. They had a little boy called Star Boy, and everyone's very happy. So then one day, Moon Mom gave Feather Woman this root digger to go get some roots for food or whatever. But she said, don't touch the great turnip or there will be much sadness. Feather Woman's like, no problem. I'm not going to touch them. But Feather Woman is very curious what's going on with the great turnip. And one day she pokes it with her root digger and she can't get it out. She's stuck. She's like, "Oh, crap." And she sees these 2 cranes and she says, "Help, help." And the 2 cranes help and they help her pull out the great turnip. Now there's a hole. Now there's a hole in the skyland ground and she looks down the hole and what does she see? It's her camp. It's her home camp down on Earth. And she's filled with this homesickness. And she's like very sad. And she goes back to the house and she shows him what she's done. And she's like, I'm very sad. I'm very homesick. And then, the sun and moon are kind of like, well, you disobeyed. You weren't supposed to do that. We feel bad, but you're not supposed to do that. So you got to go back to Earth with the kid. So Morning Star takes her to Spider Man, who also lives in Skyland. He's important because he creates a web so that over the hole so she can go back down. There were no visuals with this story online, so I can't figure that out. So unfortunately, I think that was the divorce situation because Morningstar can't hang out on Earth. He's got to live in Skyland. So poor Feather Woman and Starboy are back home. So she's happy in a way because she's back with the family and she had been quite homesick up in Skyland. But she's also pretty miserable now because she doesn't have Morning Star and she lives the rest of her life in sadness and then finally dies. It's a little bit tragic, but it's all about the turnip. Welcome.
I'm wondering what it's trying to tell you about the turnip. Like, don't take it out of the ground too soon? I'm like, I feel like there should be a message of some kind with this.
I have to say, when I first started reading this story, I thought it's going to be a happy story. No, I got to the end. I'm like, holy crap, this is sad. It's kind of reminded me of Pandora in a way.
More so than Persephone?
Yeah, I guess so. But I mean, I don't know about Persephone because, yeah, I was always like, oh, she didn't want to be down there. Didn't she really? I don't know that she didn't. And I was never convinced she never wanted to be down there. I guess
I
it
don't
depends on your
I don't know
perspective.
that I know the story well enough to have an opinion one way or the
I
other.
was a little bit skeptical of the way
Mm.
it's told, but that's just, yeah.
I'll have to ask G. He's much more informed about those particular stories than I am.
Mm.
But you know what makes me kind of sad is that I feel like I've lost those stories.
Mm.
Like, I don't have a throughput for those particular stories. Like, when I look at my DNA profile or whatever, there's so many different places
Mm.
that it comes from, which, by the way, there's an old article. I will see if I can find the reference for it, but they were asking it was actually Stanford, a genealogist, and this was early days of doing DNA testing. And they were like, "Well, what are you seeing? What would be like the most perfect human kind of thing?" And somewhat flippantly, I think, I don't know that they were being flippant, but they were like, "Oh, well, the most perfect human right now on earth would be a Puerto Rican woman." But what
Mm.
they were referencing was that at the time that this happened, Puerto Rico had the largest database of different Puerto Ricans, including those of us from the diaspora, who had actually taken DNA test. And when they looked at, like, one of the things that the geneticists were finding was greater diversity of genome made for stronger genome.
Mhm.
Over and over
Mhm.
again, they were seeing that places that had not had that mixing from
Mhm.
different areas would normally have something that would pop up that would make them weaker in one way or another. And wherever you had the greatest mixing, you had the strongest genomes. And so that's what they were referencing really in making that comment, was that you had in terms of what they could see at the time, the greatest mixing taking place in that area of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
But all of us Boricuas, especially the female Boricuas, we were taking that as like, yes, the most perfect woman, like, most perfect
Yeah.
human. 'Cause they were asked human and they said Puerto Rican woman. So it was part and parcel of the
Congratulations.
thank you. Thank you. But what I was thinking about was I looked recently at like pictures of like where my genome and it comes from so many different places that I feel like the throughput of like your ancestral stories, I don't feel like I have those. And I mean even the ones from the island itself.
Mm,
Because for the longest time, like kind of transitioning into what I had been looking at, for the longest time, accepted scientific lore was that the Taíno had been killed off.
mm,
They did not exist. In actuality, what the geneticists were finding is that they had mixed with the people who had come in later.
mhm,
And so, just like I said, my mitochondrial DNA comes from a Taíno woman, but they were also found high concentrations of Taíno DNA in the central and mountainous regions of the Puerto Rican area. And those are also the areas in Puerto Rico that, like, when Puerto Ricans talk about the history and they talk about El Grito de Lares, where Lares is in that central mountain region. It is an area where you had not only the Taino congregate as the invaders came in from the ocean, but you also had those who had been brought to the island as slaves who would escape into the mountains. And like Utuado is not that far away. When I went back and looked at where the women in my family were born, I find like my great great grandmother was born in Utuado. It's just an interesting connection point. I
mm,
have that, but then the person who probably told me the most about them in terms of my own lineage was my dad, because he talked about his grandmother who, like, smoked a cigar, literally did her hair the way that Diana did her hair. A lot of people look at Latin American culture as quite patriarchal, and I'm not saying it isn't, but the Taino culture was matriarchal. And what I mean by that is like if you were going to get an inheritance, it came through the mother's family. If there was, and they didn't own land the way that we talk about it, it was a sharing sort of thing. And the more you had, it was because you would share. Like to be a cacique was to be the one who took responsibility for caring for the village or your people kind of
mhm.
thing. And both men and women were cacique. They didn't pass it down in like an inherited title the way that maybe they do in Europe. But if you were having that sort of association, it came via your mother's family rather than your father's. So even if your father had been a cacique, the question was your mother or your mother's mother kind of thing. Like that was the association. And the reason I'm mentioning all of that is my sisters and I, in conjunction with my mom, but we own a small piece of the island under modern understandings of ownership. But that came through my dad's mom via her mom via her mom. So even though for me it's coming through the paternal side, what's
Mhm.
something that was interesting was my grandparents, when they were looking to pass the title on under, like the Americans had taken over, they wanted to pass the land on. They passed it on to my parents together. So the entire time my dad owned any part of it, he owned it 50% with my mom. So I thought it was really interesting
Mhm.
that my paternal grandmother kind of continued the matrilineal. Sure, my mom was a part of the ownership. And in fact, right now, my mom owns most of it just due to inheritance laws, which I found fascinating considering that that is not the way that I think a lot of people might think of a Latin American area being.
Mm,
So, what I found in terms of looking at somewhat more modern studies was one is there's a landmark 2018 study that sequenced the first complete ancient Taino genome. It was a 1,000-year-old Lucayan woman recovered from what's called Preacher's Cave. Now, this is not in Puerto Rico. This is a Taino woman, but it's not in Puerto Rico. On the island of, I don't know if this is how you pronounce it, Luthera in the Bahamas. And they sequenced to a 12.4-fold coverage. I don't know what that means. It'll be in the study. Anyways, her genome conclusively demonstrated that the Taíno were genetically most closely related to present-day Arawakan-speaking peoples from northern South America, particularly the Palicur and other groups from the Amazon and Orinoco basins. This
Huh.
confirmed the linguistic hypothesis that Taino ancestors entered the Caribbean from South America, starting around 2,500 years ago, and settled in the Bahamas around 1,400 years ago as part of the Osteonoid expansion.
Interesting.
And for me, as I understand it, I'm hoping I have my geography here. The Bahamas are actually north of like the major Antilles. So if we're reaching the Bahamas at that point, that means most likely they've already settled places like Cuba and Hispaniola and Puerto Rico. So by the time they're getting there, they've already done the minor Antilles, the major Antilles, in order to make it to the Bahamas. The other thing that I found amazing about that is, yes, they've always hypothesized that they came up through South America, but it also, this is anecdotal, but it reminds me of when my sister and I were in Buenos Aires. Everybody assumed we were Brazilian because they don't imagine, like that's who most often would come,
Mm.
closest. So they were happy to find out we were from somewhere else, whatever. And I loved that kind of association just because it's such a bigger place kind of thing. And this is way before Bad Bunny took on the world stage. So, I mean, it happens in the US where people have no idea where Puerto Rico is, but the Argentinians were not familiar, you know? So, yeah, they thought we were from Brazil. And so this connection to the Amazon and Orinoco Basin was an interesting connection for me in terms of reading this. Okay, so that was one of the studies.
I have a question
Go
about
ahead.
now, because I was a little bit fascinated by this wild
Yes.
rice situation. Is there a food in Taino culture that is akin?
I don't know if I could say it is akin to the wild rice in the same exact way, but cassava, yuca, is the basis of most Taino. Like they would make bread from cassava. It was like the main root vegetable. It is still very much used.
You have a
So,
mythology associated with it, like Morning Star and Star Boy?
you know what? The Taino very well could, but this is where I feel cut off.
Mm.
I don't know the mythology. And it's possible that my cousins who grew up on the island do, and
Huh.
maybe just because
Yeah.
I didn't grow up there, I don't, but I don't know it. I'd have to go and do research and try and find it, I'm like, "I don't have it."
That would be interesting.
It would be.
Yeah. I
I'm
bet
like,
there is something, some story, a myth with the food.
I am almost positive that there is, but
Yeah.
I just don't know what it is.
Mm. All
Alright.
right.
So I was talking about genomes again. I don't know if you guys can tell, I have a fascination with the DNA and the studies that have been coming out of it. I just feel like there's so much that gets confirmed via some of these and stuff that gets disproven too. But
Yep. Oh, yeah.
so the most comprehensive Caribbean genome study, it was a groundbreaking study that was published in 2020 in Nature. It was led by Harvard, the University of Vienna, and dozens of collaborators. Produced a genome-wide data from 174 ancient individuals across the Bahamas, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, Curacao, and Venezuela, spanning roughly 3,100 to 400 years before the present time. So, getting into some of Katie's archaeology.
Ed. Mm.
Yeah. It's the largest ancient DNA data set for the pre-contact Caribbean and yielded several paradigm-shifting findings. One of the findings is two distinct waves of migration. An earlier, what they called archaic population from about 6,000 years ago, derived from a deeply divergent Central South American lineage. A later ceramic age population, I don't know the ages, maybe Katie knows them, but I don't know them. The ancestors of the Taino were genetically homogeneous and related to Arawak speakers from the northeastern South America. The ceramic peoples migrated south to north through the Lesser Antilles into the Greater Antilles at least 1,700 years ago, replacing more than 98% of the archaic ancestry in most regions.
So you had two waves of Taino.
Well, the second wave is what we would refer to as Taíno. The first wave, it was replaced by the Taíno. So even as we see the Taíno as the indigenous peoples, there were a group of people that were there before them.
Yes, yes.
So that's the way I'm taking this. So there's no evidence for a North American migration.
Yeah.
A previous claim that some archaic Caribbean individuals had ancestry linked to North America was conclusively refuted. All archaic association ancestry is consistent with a single Central/South American source.
Okay.
And then cultural changes weren't driven by new migrations. Across the ceramic age, changes in pottery style, which had long been attributed to waves of new migrants, were not associated with genetically distinct populations. Instead, cultural evolution happened within an interconnected Caribbean world, one of the study's most surprising conclusions. So, for me, part of that, again, is just the fascinating component of I've always thought of Taino as the indigenous population, and they became that, but they literally placed a group of people who were there before them. That's like the thing that kind of boggles my mind with this.
Yes.
The other ones, like there's some stuff about the population size that was in the Caribbean is smaller than the history books claimed. So one of the most provocative findings from the 2020 Nature study challenged longstanding estimates of Taino population size. Historical accounts, many based on Columbus-era reports or poorly documented colonial era population counts, had placed the pre-contact population of Hispaniola alone at hundreds of thousands or even millions. The genetic data tells a very different story. Using runs of homozygosity, ROH, and shared DNA segments. So I'm talking about stuff I know nothing about right now. I'm literally reading from the shared DNA segments between individuals. The researchers estimated the effective population size of roughly 500 to 1,500 for ceramic associated sites and 200 to 300 people for archaic associated sites. And I think part of what I'm getting out of this is like this whole concept that when the Spaniards came, they wiped out the indigenous population. What I'm understanding from this is there weren't as many as they thought, so they weren't wiping them out. There just weren't as many as estimated originally. And I think about what Columbus was sort of like that dude who was coming to explore a site and try and sell it to the people who loaned him money. You know, he was like, "Yeah, there's plenty of folks for us to, like I'm not that's my thought that like, they're pumping up the numbers to make it look better."
Yeah, you can't take those are the chronicles, like the Spanish. You can't take it for real. Like exactly like you said, they'll pump up the numbers because then they'll say, "Well, we subjugated 1,000,000 people when it was 100."
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
exactly PR. A lot of
And it's another thing that kind of boggles my mind, the concept that existed for what seems like so long that the people had been wiped out, that
yeah. I mean,
disease and
anything
slavery wiped them.
anything like a statement like that, like, so they're gone, I would question it because how do you wipe especially that area with islands everywhere, and you can easily have people probably hid, you know?
They hit big time.
Yeah.
The other thing that it makes me think of is on PBS, there is a show right now because in the United States, it is demonstrated that the US government committed genocide. But there is on PBS public broadcasting stations, there's a show that's put together that's called We're Still Here. And it literally is a show that I would recommend people check out that's about the native peoples within the United States and covers different topics and different people. And I think it's an amazing thing because I feel like we hear so little about those who are still alive today. Like we tend to talk about them, like even now I'm talking about people, the ancient ones that were
Mhm.
studied, and this is a show that's focused on those who are still here, they're alive, they're well, they're thriving in some instances and not in others, but they are still here. Um, and I just think it's really important to presence that. There's one more element of this 2020 Nature published study that even though it was small populations, even the really ancient women, the Lucaina women, so that's the population they thought was the smallest, showed remarkably low levels of inbreeding, some of the lowest of any Native American genome studied, suggesting that Taíno maintained large interconnected exchange networks despite living on small islands. The study detected 19 pairs of cross-island cousins, and even close male relatives buried 75 kilometers apart in the Dominican Republic, confirming that the Caribbean communities were highly mobile and exchanged not just goods and ideas, but also genes. And I think another thing that maybe they're not making this connection, but it's something that I've read about when they talk about matrilineal. So not necessarily woman-led always, but matrilineal societies, which is that the men moved.
Mm.
Like,
Mhm.
they would move to the place of their partner
Yeah.
kind of thing, as opposed to the women
Mhm.
moving, which is what, for me, is indicative of that, like, 75-kilometer distance. So, there's more out there and there's more study, but there's another aspect of this, like, you were asking me about the stories, and I think one of the adapted ways is, like, I have a book that I'm in the process of reading that I've only, I don't know, maybe a third of the way through, called Espiritismo, so spiritism. But in Puerto Rico, um, it has some relations to the animism, but not exactly, because they took the local, the native, and in order to make it possible to exist under the auspices of enforced colonialism, they took their belief systems and incorporated them into, like, the Catholic Church, for example, that was superimposed on top of them. And so this spiritismo is sort of this conglomeration of the two.
Mhm.
And yes, somebody who maybe studies it and is knowledgeable about the ins and outs of both could maybe tease out the different elements. I am not at that level yet. Something that I continue to learn about, not having grown up on the island myself. I look for ways to learn something more. So there are aspects of that. Something that does come through very clearly is the respect for ancestors, for elders. That's very much a part of the Spiritism.
Mm.
The belief in the healing powers of what you eat, what you consume, what you do, and in healing touch
Mhm.
of other people. So these are things that are interwoven within that belief system. The other one I'm reading about is even in modern Puerto Rico, because the woman who wrote this went to school on the island. She went and did a study to find the women who were a part of the history making moments of what would be considered modern on the island. And I just feel like, just like our native people so often, I don't know if they're always left out, but maybe they're not centered or talked about, or to the point where there's literally a show that talks about we're still here. There's some of that when it comes to the women in history as well. And so one of the things that I've been enjoying reading about is the various women and she's going from actual records. So, like, she's finding them hidden in the very patriarchal colonial history of, like, the women who were still present, the women who were still fighting, the women who were leaders. And it's something that I find incredibly fascinating. And there's a whole section where she talks about Taino women and just proof, even within a colonial record that would as soon dismiss them as include them, still manages to mention them because they
This is
were.
the Spanish colonialists.
Yes, this is the Spanish
Yes.
colonial. So I cannot.
Evidently, Spanish were meticulous record keepers. So they may have put a slant possibly on them, but they would have noted them, I think.
Yeah. And the thing is, based on its position, Puerto Rico is one of those places that sometimes was the last touch point in the Americas before things were shipped to Spain, because it's the furthest out of the Greater Antilles. Like, you literally have the Atlantic on one side and the Caribbean on the other. Um, and it's the reason that when the United States came in and helped liberate Cuba, they were not willing to liberate Puerto Rico, because if they were creating their own colonial empire, its strategic position meant they wanted to be in control of it. Sort of like the British with Gibraltar.
Oh, yeah. Yes, yes.
Yeah. And there's I feel like I'm not doing justice to them, but I, at one point for school, had looked up where I'm living now and who were the native people and who were the native people from when I lived in New York City. And I just find it so fascinating how in our modern world, like I was telling Katie this earlier, my brain feels like a sieve. I'm going to have to go look up these names again and find them. I don't know if disconcerting is the right term. Odd that we don't acknowledge always what came before, especially those who, like the people the Chippewa are trying to do now, continue to do, which is we're the caretakers of the lands that we're on.
Australia does it.
That's cool.
Yes, every possible gathering, there is an acknowledgement of the traditional caretakers of the lands. And I was thinking, well, maybe it's because they're living tribes, but there are living tribes in America. I mean, I
There
don't know about Connecticut. I don't know anything about that, but
the ancestors of the people who occupied Connecticut, I mean, the descendants are still, I think they were the closest ones now, if I remember correctly from what I read, are based in Delaware, but you
mm,
still have people who are of that. And, like, when I was at Columbia, especially the School of Social Work, a lot of the classes, especially the foundational classes, began with a land acknowledgement. Land acknowledgement is lovely, but how about a set opportunity for people from existing people alive now today being able to go to school there
hmm,
without having to pay the fees? I mean, even if they ended up in the capitalistic sense of limiting it, saying, like 2 a year or something, it still would be more than they have maybe given to those people now.
hmm. Yeah, I don't know. But it is definitely standard practice to acknowledge in Australia. Um, but it does it's kind of I they're not even recognized as citizens. So,
Really?
the Constitution. I don't know if they can vote or not, but that is a massive issue.
The difficulty that I sometimes had and what I was trying to describe, I think land acknowledgments, I think the actual acknowledgement is wonderful. Like, I really do. Like, I'm not taking anything away from the ceremonial aspect of it.
Mhm.
But we still do live in a capitalist, supposedly, at least republic democracy. It's a republic. It's not a straight democracy. In this country, they do have the right to vote, but with rules and regulations that are getting passed nowadays, might be difficult for some of them. And it just feels like, for me, it feels like not enough.
Here, I'm
You
just
froze.
Googling it.
You're Googling whether they can. Well, while you're doing that, I will say that we've had some of our first, like, native, like, we had our first woman who was the head of the Department of Interior under Biden, who was a Native woman, and she had been a Native congresswoman prior to that. Deb Haaland, I think was her name. I can only imagine what's going on under the current administration. But, I mean, that was 2020? It sort of boggles my mind that it has taken that long
So they
to have.
can vote.
Okay.
1984, they were allowed. Just like, what? But I'm sure they're not in the Constitution, though. There's something about the Constitution that it's
Is it representation that they don't have their own?
of the rights. There's no recognition. Well, at least it's a standard practice to do the land recognition, but it doesn't mean the Aboriginal people are in
Better place.
a good place, you know. Like you said, I don't want to take away from it either because it's is meaningful, of course, and I'm sure many people find meaning in it, but you also want to be recognized in the Constitution, don't you?
Yeah, I definitely would think so.
But important. I guess I'm saying like you get the respect on that one level, but then you don't in other spheres. So it sort of seems an imbalanced approach to people who were there originally.
Well, it's part of why I was and I did verify that I had her name right. It's Deb
Mm.
Haaland. She's of the Laguna Pueblo, and she was the first Native American cabinet secretary in US history.
Wow.
She oversaw the Department of the Interior, which includes the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Bureau of Indian Education. So
What year was that?
she 2020 to 2025, it was under the Biden administration. Was the first time.
Remember when that happened actually, now that you mention it. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh,
Something I
finally.
did something I didn't know was prior to Highland, Charles Curtis, a member of the Kaw Nation, served as vice president under Herbert Hoover from
Oh,
1929 to 1933,
wow.
making him the first person of Native ancestry to serve in the cabinet-level line of succession.
I'm
I had
shocked.
no idea. I mean, I guess we don't learn about our vice presidents normally. Like, the ones who were vice president when you were alive kind of thing, or shortly before, but
Yeah.
unless they succeeded to the presidency, we don't
Or
normally know anything about them.
unless they've made a huge goof.
That's true. But he was alive. I mean, he was vice president while we were alive. So that's
Yeah.
why I don't know other vice presidents. Like I have no idea who's vice president under these others. So I didn't know that.
Hmm.
I'm like, do we have any current members of Congress who are? I don't know.
Must be. There's gotta be.
Marquane Mullen of the Cherokee Nation. He's a Republican senator from Oklahoma. He is the only Native American in the Senate in the 100th Congress. Tom Cole of the Chickasaw Nation. He's a Republican representative for Oklahoma's 4th District. Josh Brechin of the Choctaw Nation. He's a Republican representative for Oklahoma's 2nd District. And Sharice Davids, Ho-Chunk Nation, Democratic representative for Kansas 3rd
Mm.
District.
Quite a few from Oklahoma.
Well, Oklahoma's title before Oklahoma was Indian Territory. It's where the Trail of Tears went. Like, the Cherokee and the Choctaw were moved to the Oklahoma territories.
All Republicans.
Well, I'm gonna stay away from that topic right now because I could definitely go down that rabbit hole.
Woman. One woman Democrat.
And you notice it's the woman.
Hmm.
You notice it's the woman,
Interesting.
right? She was the one that I was aware of. I had heard of Charisse,
Okay.
probably due to, I don't know, either some legislation or something else. I think she had done something with Deb Haaland.
Okay.
Yeah. And I lived in Oklahoma when I was a wee. One of my sisters went to college in Oklahoma. I had a friend, I did some additional energy healing school in Spain, and my roommate was from Oklahoma.
Hmm.
So just like we had that other day, Wisconsin,
Yes, Wisconsin.
I've had a couple of touch points with Oklahoma in my lifetime, but I have not been there since my sister graduated college. Yeah. So have you ever been to Oklahoma?
I don't think so, but it's possible I've driven through it, but I don't remember, so
Mm,
maybe not. No, I don't know. I'm gonna say no.
gotcha. I have memories of being like 5 and the prairie dogs were really cute and the buffalo were big.
Yep.
When you're 5, everything's big, but I was a short 5-year-old. Prairie dogs were cute. Yeah.
Well, anyway,
Do you know, the Shinto myths?
well, it's the usual sun god situation.
Mm.
The goddesses and the sisters and Amaterasu is the sun god, or I can't remember, god or goddess. Anyway, that emperor is descended from directly, of course.
He would be kind of like Starboy, a descendant of Starboys.
Yes, yes. That's why he's emperor, evidently.
At one point you had talked about the potential connection of your grandmother to the Sami people. I'm
Mhm.
wondering if they are animist.
Probably. I don't know. I don't know much about the Sami. Uh,
I don't either. I was again, it's one of those curiosities you end up, like, throwing out, kind of like, I wonder." So, like, the word hurricane comes from a name for one of the gods of the Taíno people, Urukan. It was the god of, like, storms, I believe, so it's a connection, but I don't know in their cosmology where that god
Mhm.
landed, and my understanding is any sort of gendering of that particular god was male, which I find interesting,
Mm.
as opposed to female. But then, Poseidon was male as well, and I think he would have been the god most connected. Well, now Zeus, god of storms in the Greek pantheon.
Was he a god of storms?
Well, he's the god of thunder. Maybe I just associate it with thunder and lightning.
Mm.
His lightning bolt.
Isn't that Thor?
That's a different cosmology, but yeah. But Zeus also has a lightning bolt.
Is he?
Mhm. Yeah.
Thought he was just having sex with humans everywhere.
That too. That too. And that's the kind of stuff, like, I know bits and pieces, like barbecue, the word barbecue, barbacoa,
Hmm.
it's a Taino word. Hammock, hamaca is a Taino word. Canoe is a Taino word. So there's a number of words that we still use to this day that come from them, but I
Yeah.
don't know much about their cosmology.
Mm. You should
More s
find out. Maybe there's a website. Maybe there's a website. Somebody out there.
I know, like, let us know.
It to us.
Well, I will look up some of that. You gotta look up the Sami and reacquaint yourself with the Japanese cosmology.
Yes, I do actually. I am interested in it and I hear it, but I don't absorb. I mean, I know Amaterasu, but
Yeah.
that's about it. Everyone knows her.
Would your mom be able to tell you?
Oh, I don't know if she knows that much anymore, but it's all online. Like there's lots of stuff on Shinto.
I mean, I will end up looking it up because my mom was definitely raised more traditionally Catholic.
Mm.
I don't know that she knows and she left the island when she was 7. So even for her, what she would have learned would have been, through her parents, her brothers, and her sisters. She did live on the island at other times, but not necessarily in that, like, she was 18, 19 years old. So not necessarily in the, "Let me tell you a story time" of like that, which I find is when you normally get these sort of formative, learn the cosmology kinda aspects. I don't find that it's the kind of stories that they normally share as much with teens. Not saying
Don't
they don't, just
My mother is, I don't think she's interested in that kind of thing.
I'm wondering, so I've often talked to trees. I hug trees, I talk to them. And I'm now wondering, did I get some of that through the spiritism and my grandparents, or did I
Oh my
pick up
god,
some
we
of
need to
that?
do a topic on plants and trees because there's articles about that they react to us.
They do.
And I just read an article about the pine needles during a thunderstorm and that they create an corona effect. They light up at the ends because
Mm.
of electricity in the air. Now, then I read further down that a scientist said poo pooed it because he's like, well, it's only like a few trees. But still, I don't know. There's something in it.
I like the idea of finding out more about that, and I'm just gonna finish the thought I was having where I was wondering if I picked up the animism aspect of trees and my talking to them and communing with them when I was a little kid in Japan.
You might be attuned to the wood element, perhaps,
Perhaps. In
versus
Chinese,
stone. You didn't hug a stone, so perhaps you like.
I do like rocks, but I would say my water dragon nephew likes the rocks more than I do. I'm a water rat, so we're both water, but that's in the Chinese cosmology. I don't know how much Japan uses that.
Well, there's bits of it. Bits of it. Yeah.
So, do you know what your element is? You don't know what your element is? I'm like, I'm so shocked. I know that you are a boar in the sense of a pig boar, not
Yeah.
a,
Yeah. I am a pig.
but I don't know what your element is. I'm like, are you a water?
I use water as a relaxation and detox sort of thing.
I'm trying to do this fast, and of course, it's not working fast because Mercury's
I think I
retrograde.
would be fire because I'm even too scared to do those lighters. I can't do it. I'm scared of lighters.
The Bic lighters?
Yeah, I can't do it. I can't. I'm scared to be burned.
Hmm.
So
I like
probably not fire.
I'm just so you're a metal pig.
I'm a metal. Ooh, weird.
Your associated is yin metal pig.
Okay. Well, I am a yin yoga teacher, certified.
And the water rat that year started on Anne's birthday, February 15th. That was the Lunar New Year that year.
I
Mhm.
do like to study metal, but other than that, I don't think I have anything to do with metal, really. How interesting. I'll have to read up about it. I wonder what that means.
Yeah, I
Mm,
like that stuff. I remember when my nephew was gonna be born and the fact that he was gonna be a water dragon because we rats really like dragons and that he's gonna be a water dragon. I was so excited.
wonderful.
Yes. It's why I'm a bit sad right now because he is in his early teen years when they're like, "Yeah, no, I don't wanna talk to anybody of my elders."
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
waiting for him to come back.
Huh. You will.
But my nephew, who is a dog, has come back.
Oh,
He started coming back around 17, really saw it at 18. So, he's 19 now. He's
what is
back.
his element?
I don't know. Let's see. I know he's a dog. You'd think I'd have it all memorized, but I don't. He's a fire dog.
There you go.
And he was born just before 10 days before the fire pig.
Mm,
Fire pig. Yes. Yep. He's a fire dog. That's interesting. So it starts 12 years of an element with a cycle. So you as the pig are the end of the metals. So like the 1964 dragon is a metal dragon.
hmm.
I as a rat start the next 12-year cycle of the water rats.
I see.
And then goes through 5, like you have that cycle and then there's 5 elements. So yeah, Marcos was the end of almost the end because the fire pig in 2008, well, 2007 was the end of that cycle. And then it went back to water. I'm like,
Great. That's great.
is it like when I first started talking to you about Mercury retrograde?
I mean, it's just like, I don't know. Okay.
I'll draw
20
you a chart.
years, 5 elements. God
I'll draw
knows
you a chart.
what's going on
I'm
right
sure
now.
there's some online, but I just figured that out in my head.
Is this why you feel, like, triumphant? Because you have this
Yes.
glow of triumph.
Yes. Because now if I know the element of one set,
Yeah.
I can kind of guess
Kind of guess what? Their
what the
year?
elements are for the others. So, but I'm not sure that that's right because my sisters are not water. Rabbits. They're wood rabbits. So that's not right.
So there's a glitch.
A glitch. It looks like the pigs and the rats go together, but I know the rabbits don't. So no, my epiphany is wrong. I just want to put a pin in this, that this might be a topic that we come back to in different ways, because I don't think it's a singular topic. You know, both the protection of the nature, the scientific studies, and the archaeological aspects. I think all of those aspects are things that we may find ourselves talking about in other ways. But I'm glad that we focused a little bit today in a small way